Hi everyone, my name is Abby Morris and my book study was on Chapter 7, which covered differentiating instruction using formative assessment. To begin, let's talk about the definition of differentiated instruction. That's when teachers utilize a variety of instructional methods based on student needs, whether those needs are cognitive, affective, physical, and or cultural. In my school district, we usually talk about differentiation when we're discussing special education or English language learners, students with perceived unique needs, but really differentiated instruction will focus on differences in readiness, interests, and opportunities to learn. So with that in mind, every learner needs differentiated and personalized instruction. The central idea is that different students will learn best in different ways, and it could depend on day to day or concept to concept, and educators will need to respond to those individual needs. Now, the way that you do that and the way you know what a child needs is through data. So the authors describe data as a roadmap to drive differentiation. So it's going to be our guide to let us know what our kids need when and what we also need to improve on as teachers. So data will play an important role in the teacher's ability to differentiate instruction. You're going to need a large variety of data, but the most important thing is that it needs to be aligned with key concepts and standards to inform instruction. So you might hear terms like power standards, focus standards, need to knows. So these are the standards that you know you're going to get the most bang for your buck out of, and you really want to hone your data in on those standards that you know are going to be high leverage for your kids. Teachers will be able to analyze their own strengths and weaknesses as teachers. So if you're doing a specific concept and you notice that your kids are really struggling with it, then that lets you know that, hey, maybe there's something that we need to look out for here, and maybe there's something I can change in my instruction, as well as your strengths. I do very well with this standard, and my kids are just knocking it out of the park, so I know that I need to keep up the good work on that. And it also will help us to identify student needs from standard to standard and kid to kid. A commitment to standards will help teachers identify priorities for instruction. So something that the authors used was this cycle of instruction, assessment, and data inquiry, which I really liked. So you'll start with some sort of assessment or some sort of instruction in which you will then assess. And then from there, there's going to be analysis of the data and results. And then you will form your instruction based on that analysis, assess again, and then make some more decisions based on analysis of data, and then change your instruction, move your instruction on from there based on that analysis. And that just the cycle carries on. So everything that you do is going to be informed by data. And the way that you get that is through meaningful assessments. So that creates a feedback loop, which is identifying students' learning gaps, and then that will inform planning, and then that will in turn guide instruction. There are many forms of differentiation, and teachers will need to use a variety of measures to understand the fullest picture of their students possible. So with that in mind, a summative evaluation every 6 weeks like we do in our school district or just on the state exam are not really sufficient to tell us where students are strong and weak. Usually what happens is you'll have an end of unit or end of course exam or test, and then what do you do with that information? You'll know if your kids learned it or not, maybe, but then at that point you won't be able to do much about it because the test is over, the learning is over. So what you really have to focus on is using a variety of measures. Formative, interim, benchmark, and diagnostic measures taken together will give the teacher direction in planning instruction. So then from there, you can do small group differentiation and individual differentiation. So the chapter describes some examples for small group and individual. And again, even though they look a little bit different, really the focus is the data and making decisions based on the data. So when you're customizing instruction and when you're differentiating instruction, you really have to be flexible. Those formative assessments are going to tell teachers and their students about their individual progress, and they're going to be critical to a teacher's ability to adapt lessons and check for student understanding. So I think the key word there is to adapt. So you're no longer going to be able to do an entire 6 weeks of lesson plans ahead of time or laminate your lesson plans, which used to be the joke when I first started teaching. because you're going to be responding to your student needs at all times. So things might take longer, things might take a shorter amount of time, but what's important is to keep it student and standard centered, and you're going to get that information from formative assessment data. At that point, teachers can be responsive to the results of an assessment, and their curriculum strategy will be modified based on the results. It is important, of course, legally that we cover all the standards required by the states, but some standards will carry more weight than others. And when you're responding to data through formative assessment, it's going to be impossible to have every day of the year planned out ahead of time, and so you're going to really have to be responsive to the data and have some meaningful analysis of the data to make modifications as you go. This will also help us to encourage self-directed learners, which is, I know, a buzzword right now, but it's really such a great point, because for individualized instruction or remediation to be effective, teachers and students must be involved in a systematic inquiry process. So no longer should it just be the teachers with the data looking and analyzing and making decisions and making goals, but really kids have to get involved in that if they're going to have the skills that they need to move forward. Teachers cannot continue to be the giver of all knowledge, but they have to be partners with students throughout the learning process. And that includes looking at their data, knowing their strengths and weaknesses, and being able to make a plan from there. Students will engage in this self-directed learning cycle, and that's going to include timely goals, action steps, and opportunities for feedback. Spoon feeding every little piece of information to students, I think we all know, will not work anymore. They need to be able to understand what their strengths and weaknesses are, be able to make a plan, and then be able to make steps to execute the plan and then reflect on that. So the future implications, if the known purpose of assessment and education is to support learning, then schools have to change the way we utilize assessments. So formative assessments will allow teachers to respond to strengths and weaknesses in student learning immediately. Summative assessments, like 6 weeks exams or state assessments, do not give students an opportunity to improve. So that's kind of what I was talking about earlier. When you just have that summative assessment, okay, so we get the STAR exam or the STAR results back for English, high school English, right before school ends in June. So we barely know if the kids are going to even graduate based on those exams. So what good does that data do us now? Really very little. So we really have to get into those formative assessments, because that's going to inform the teaching and inform the learning. Formative assessments inform learning, so assessments cannot be used simply for the sake of assessment. And I know that that's a kind of a crazy thing really in our school system, because you have to have a certain amount of test grades, you have to have certain exams required by the state. Every kid is tested, with the SATs and PSATs in our district, but really those assessments are good and they do give you valuable information, but they don't necessarily inform your instruction on a day-to-day basis. Schools are changing and assessments must change alongside them. Formative assessments also provide feedback, and that's going to be beyond what summative assessment data can provide. So it should clarify what good performance is. So you might use a model for a student. For example, in English, we would use an essay, a student essay, not just one of our own. We would use a student essay and say, this is strong, and here's why, here's what makes this a good score. And maybe I discourage this, but you could even show them a weaker one and not spend too much time on it, but just give them an idea about what kind of performance you expect from them. You'll also be able to facilitate the development of self-assessment and reflection in learning. So if you're giving meaningful feedback through formative assessment, students are going to be able to self-assess and be able to reflect on that. It should also provide high-quality information to students about their own learning. It should also emphasize positive self-esteem. So we all know, and we've all been there with kids that have, especially I feel like at the high school level, when we've had kids that have failed tests since they were in 3rd and 4th grade, they're not exactly feeling good about their abilities. So really formative assessments are supposed to help kids have a game plan. They're not supposed to say, hey, you're bad at this. You can't do this. You should really work harder. It's okay. Here are the areas that we're struggling in. So, what kind of plan can we make to get better? And just take it bird by bird, step by step. And that should build students' self-esteem, their ability to make, strides on these small goals instead of just being labeled as a failure. It should also close the feedback loop. So the author, Owen, talking about closing the feedback loop is talking about the timeliness of feedback, which I'm sure we've all struggled with, about how do you get information back to students quickly and efficiently so that they can actually act on it. So formative assessments will take away that, once a week quiz or once every other week test and give you more day-to-day assessment and more day-to-day data. It should provide information that will inform instruction. So again, you would be making decisions for your curriculum and instruction based on the data provided by the formative assessments. I was also reminded of our work with 21st century skills when I was reading about formative assessments. We're trying to get our kids to think on a deeper level and be more conceptual and be able to solve problems. And to do that, I think formative assessment can play a really significant role, because assessments of 21st century skills, according to Kay and Greenhill, they should be balanced. They should provide useful feedback for everyday learning. They should be technology enhanced, both formative and summative. They should be facilitating the development of portfolio of student work, and they should facilitate a balanced portfolio of measures. These are all things that go into the foundation of formative assessment. So 21st century skills should also benefit by moving towards data-driven formative assessments. There's many benefits, of course, to common formative assessment. So when you're working on a team of teachers in a professional learning community and you're using the same formative assessment, that will promote efficiency, equity for students. So students from one class to the next, even though they don't need to be taught in a lockstep way, they don't need to be taught the same exact way, it still will promote equity and hold every student to the same level of accountability. It should provide an effective strategy for determining whether the guaranteed curriculum is being taught and learned. So is every kid in every class getting what they need as far as the curriculum goes? It will also inform the practice of individual teachers and then build a team's capacity to improve. And it should also facilitate a systematic collective response to students who are experiencing difficulty. So the major idea in this chapter is that you'll use the data to inform your instruction. So when you're using common formative assessments, then you're able to make a plan for response in your team of how to help kids who are struggling, and also how to help kids with enrichment and moving forward when they've mastered a concept. It will also offer the most powerful tool for changing adult behavior and practice. So when you see the data right in front of you and your kids are struggling with this, it's very difficult to keep on keeping on with the same thing that you always do. So I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about some work that we're doing on our English 2 team with common formative assessments, and we've been using rubrics, which pretty much every article I read talked about the use of rubrics as opposed to the use of number grades, so going more standards based. So you'll see here, and you don't need to understand exactly what it is, but these are 2 different rubrics that we tried out with English 2 about 2 weeks ago when they were getting started. We were working with them with associative language, and I made these rubrics for the team, one for a pre-writing strategy and one for a short answer response. And we took what we really focused on with the kids for that week and for that concept and put that into the rubric so that it rewards them for what they did well on, and it helps us to identify specific things that they're doing poorly on. So, with this skill, it's very hard to just give a score based on the state rubric and know exactly what the kids need. But you can see here that a kid can see if it's sufficient. If I got a sufficient if I got a sufficient score on my pre-writing, I know that I had two strong L2 words, which is associative language, but one or more pieces of my evidence doesn't support the association. So that's telling us a lot more than it was a sufficient, it was an okay response, you get a 70. So it really helps us to know what the kids need. So our teachers did that based on the same lesson, the same piece, and the same question, the same common formative assessment, which is a reading comprehension analysis question. And then from that point, they took that sampling of assignments from all of the English 2 students and we calibrated our rubric together. So we looked at about 10 pieces between all of us and decided what we thought was proficient, what we thought it was developing, and we got everybody grouped out. And then